Trump has a trial date set for March 4th in D.C. This is garbage. It's the day before Super Tuesday. Make no mistake of what's going on here. Democrats and those on the left are trying to claim that they care about preserving democracy by trying to shut down the political campaign and put in prison the chief political adversary of the President of the United States. This is unbelievable. And to do so while claiming that you care about democracy. We care about democracy so much that we want the chief political adversary of the current President of the United States to be put in prison is an incredible argument to be making. The fact that anyone with a functional brain would buy it is absolutely crazy. This is madness. We should not be prosecuting sitting political office holders or, in my opinion, people who are running for President of the United States by the Department of Justice of the sitting office holder. This is all madness, okay? 240 years, this has never happened. Whatever you think of Trump, he is not some unique political threat. I'll just give you one example. In 1864, Abraham Lincoln ran against George Brinton McClellan. McClellan was the former commanding officer of the Union Army. At stake in that election was the question of whether or not the Civil War might continue to be pursued or whether instead there might be some form of rapprochement, some form of peace between the North and the South. Okay? Think about this for a moment. We had an election during the Civil War, and the chief political adversary of Abraham Lincoln was his former commanding general who ran against him potentially to stop the war. I bring all of that up because Lincoln didn't put McClellan in jail, even though McClellan was attempting to end the Civil War by removing Abraham Lincoln by beating him in 1864. For anyone out there who thinks that Trump is a unique threat to the country, you're crazy. 1944, there was an election over potentially whether we should continue to be involved in World War II. Franklin D. Roosevelt won that election. The election took place during the middle of World War II and concerned whether or not we should continue to fight World War II. Whatever you think of Trump, this idea that he's in some form or fashion a unique existential threat to American democracy is laughably absurd. This is the Biden Department of Justice exercising raw political power to put a man in prison because they are exercising raw political power. It's nothing else. And the media that is complicit in allowing this to happen and not raising their hands and saying, wait a minute, is this a good precedent to set? Is going to be on the wrong side of history. People love to debate, are you on the right side of history or the wrong side of history? I'm confident that in the decades ahead, long after I am gone, long after every one of you are gone, and when the long verdict of history is rendered, I'm very confident that I'm going to be on the right side of history here. Because it's an awful precedent to try to put your chief political adversary in prison using your own Department of Justice. What is my evidence for that? Basically all of human history. This is how democracies actually die, when people become afraid that if they lose, they or their family will go to prison or be killed, which is now the precedent that is being put in place by Joe Biden. I'll just reiterate, everything that they told you Trump would do, Joe Biden is actually doing. He's actually executing true totalitarianism and embracing authoritarian rule. Just worth keeping it. The mugshot of Trump came out. So, by the way, the Trump trial tape's a total joke. We talked about it a lot on Clay and Buck. On Thursday night, that is last Thursday night, the mugshot came out of Trump. I tweeted, this is immediately, I think, going to become, and I talked about it on the radio the next day, one of the most famous photos of all time. And I think there's an argument to be made that it's the most famous photo of all time because never before has any president had a mugshot taken. Therefore, it will be featured, that mugshot, for hundreds of years going forward. And I said, as I discussed, if you asked me, hey, what are some of the most famous photos that have ever existed? I don't mean portraits. I don't mean still shots of video. I mean actual photos. The soldier kissing the woman in Times Square. George Bush, I would say, standing on the rubble with a megaphone in 9/11. Iwo Jima, the soldiers raising the flag. Neil Armstrong on the moon. There are a lot of different ones you can talk about. There's 4 or 5 really popular ones right now. I think the Trump mugshot is going to become as popular and as famous and as iconic as all of those photos because of what it represents. We've never before seen a president put in a mugshot in the history of the United States. And so this idea that somehow the glowering photo of Trump is not going to be incredibly poignant historically up there as famous, potentially more famous as any photo that has ever existed in American history, I think is just wrong. And in fact, if you want me to put on my historian hat, think about how famous the still photographs are of Abraham Lincoln from Matthew Brady and his group of photographers during the Civil War. Now, that was a new form of technology, but you can see in the visage, in the face of Abraham Lincoln, the toil that being president of the United States took upon him, the degree to which he aged. Lincoln used to sit in the telegraph office and wait for word from the battlefield, the absolute latest, most up-to-date reports from the battlefield. He would sit there all hours. And this idea that Trump's mugshot is not going to become iconic in a similar way is, frankly, I just think wrong. And I think it lacks, many people do, and this is the truth, this is why you study history. You have to have a long view of history to understand what gets lost in the noise and what becomes iconic. And I believe that Trump and that photo will be still iconic 100 years from now. I think people are going to be arguing about Trump and his legacy long after all of us are dead. That's what the long arm of history reflects, right? The long march of history is oftentimes until everybody who lived during an era is gone, we don't get an accurate, less politically motivated take on exactly what the history of the moment is. And look, people continue to reassess and recalibrate historical figures for all of life and all of our lives and beyond. That's what historiography is, the way that history evolves. And I say that as a history nerd and someone who has been in charge of studying history and fascinated by it for his entire life. Trump versus Biden. And I'm going to keep hammering this home. In the event that we see a Trump versus Biden rematch, will the vote totals be higher or lower than 2020? Buck and I got into a debate over this, and you can see what that debate is. You can go vote if you are so inclined. And in particular, around 5,000 of you have voted so far. I argue that less people will vote in 2024. Buck argues that there will be more votes. 59% say less votes. 41% say more votes. The way that Trump wins, in my opinion, I think there are three pathways. I don't think a lot of people are going to change their mind. I don't think there are that many people who voted in 2020 that if we get a rematch, will say, hey, I voted Trump in 2020. I'm voting Biden in 2024. I don't think there's that many Biden 2020 voters who will flip back to Trump in 2024, right? I think there are three ways Trump wins in the event that we have a rematch. One is lower turnout. I think if there is lower turnout, and I do believe there will be less than the 156 million people who turned out in 2020 for the election, I think fewer people are going to turn out. I think the way that people will register their displeasure with Biden is by not showing up. And 77% say Biden is too old to be president if he is running. I think that some of the people who were swing voters that showed up and voted for Biden will be less likely to show up. I think the Trump voters are going to be more motivated. I think the Biden voters are going to be less motivated. That's my theory. And we're looking 16 months out. Obviously, a lot can change. Third party. One way to win, lower turnout. Another way to win, third party. I think the more third party activity there is, most people don't want a Trump-Biden rematch. That is a huge percentage of the American public. I think there may well be a third party. I think the third party works against Biden because I think it dilutes the anti-Trump vote. Again, in my opinion, most people didn't vote for Joe Biden. They voted against Trump. Third is Biden's health collapses after he's locked in officially as the candidate. I think he could have a Mitch McConnell-like moment where he's unable to speak, where he freezes, where he has a stroke, where he collapses. I don't think, and I hate to say this, I don't think Joe Biden is going to be healthy enough if he were elected in 2024 to finish his term to 2028. 2029, technically, since a new president will be sworn in January of 2029. I don't think Biden is capable of making it that long. I think he'll actually die. And if you look at, for instance, the actuarial tables, 82 years old, over the next 4 years, if you make it to 82, there's basically a 50-50 chance that you would die in the next 4 years. I don't think that staggers anyone. I don't think that's stunning to anyone. I think a lot of people see that and they say, yeah, that makes sense. If you make it to 82, which is longer than most people live, over the next 4 years, there is a decent chance that you would die. I think Biden is not, for an 80-year-old, particularly svelte, particularly on top of the ball physically or mentally. I think if he made it to 82, finishes his term, I think there's 50-50 chance he would die in office, which would make Kamala Harris. I think a lot of voters out there will think about it. I think Biden could have a health-related concern. Assuming he runs, I think Trump wins with lower turnout. I think Trump wins with a third party. And I think Trump wins with a Biden health collapse. I think those are the three most likely ways for Trump to end up winning.